Hi, I'm Bob Pollock from Penn State Extension here in Indiana County, and with us today is...
I'm Dennis Repko. I'm a master gardener.
And we want to follow up on late blight. This disease has been a major problem, the worst that I've ever seen it here in Indiana County, and it's a fungus that affects tomato plants and potato plants. And we've already done a segment about it, and we've also talked about it on the radio just about weekly for the last 6 weeks. But at this point, there's been so many gardens and tomato plants infected as well as potato plants that we want to just follow up with some things based on a lot of the questions that we've been getting very recently. So we do have a plant here, and it's still alive, and it actually does have a little bit initial infection of late blight on it. But this is typically what we would see. We have a leaf up on the upper part of the plant, and we can see that the tip of it has turned brown and starting to curl and almost looks a little bit water soaked. And that's typically what will happen in a late blight infection. Now the other thing that is also very common on tomatoes this growing season is what we call early blight. Early blight and late blight are separate diseases, and we're going to just follow up a little bit on that. We do have fact sheets in the office that talk about both these diseases individually, but at this point in time, one of the questions that we've been getting is, can we eat the tomatoes? And do you want to just talk a little bit about the tomatoes, Dennis?
Yeah, the tomatoes are still edible. Now these tomatoes here, you can't tell, there's really no outward signs of the blight on them. But you'll see on a tomato, it'll just look like a blister. Like if you got a burn and you had a second-degree burn on your skin, the tomato will actually blister like that. And you can see a little bit like this on this one. This is way too far. But if you get some smaller ones and the tomato is red, you could still eat that tomato. The tomato is still edible. You're not going to be, there's nothing in this disease that can harm you as a human. You can just cut that a little bit of area away and still eat that tomato. And if you like fried green tomatoes, you can still eat the green tomato. Just cut that little area away, discard it, put it in your garbage can, send it to the landfill. Don't put it in your compost pile now, because all you'll do is infect your compost pile for next year. And don't put it back in your garden. Make sure you get it to the landfill so you don't have any more infestation. But the tomato is still edible and still good, but those are too far gone. Those need to go to the landfill so that you don't infect your compost pile.
Yeah, one of the things that people have been asking about is, what do we do with the plants? And really the recommendation is to take this plant and bag it in a garbage bag. What we're trying to do is stop the inoculum from continuing to be spread every time we get a wetting period. So overnight when we have dew, that's enough for this fungus to activate and then the spores to be released. And there are some special technical names to the spores and how that all happens, and we're not going to get into that here. But what we want to do is slow it down as much as possible. Now with late blight, so we want to get rid of that. And Dennis mentioned about the tomatoes, so if you do have green tomatoes on this plant, it is still functioning. And especially if they get to be mature green, which is the stage right before they start to get a little bit of color on them. And here's, this tomato is just starting to turn pink. So green mature, and then it's getting to the pink stage before it'll finally turn red. But even when they get to this stage, as long as they're sound, if you have spots on them like this, you can try and cut that out. You just have to cut it to see what you get into. We have a knife here. We'll do that. Okay. Now, in this particular tomato, we do have decay down in the center here. So when it's all said and done, we're not going to have very much here to work with. That when it gets to this stage, we're probably better off just getting them discarded. The fungus is in here. We want this thing to rot. We need the plant to rot. We need the tomatoes infected with it to rot and decay. Once the plant is completely dead and the tomatoes are rotten, the disease can't survive. Okay, and that's key with this. Late blight will not spend the winter here, okay? So that's why we want to get this bagged up and disposed of. It can't overwinter here. Now, the exception, and there is an exception to that, is if you have potatoes, and if you have an infected potato, and say you left that in the garden, your plants died down, you didn't even harvest them, you left them there, and that potato survived in the ground over winter, then, and was able to sprout in the spring, then that plant, that volunteer, does have the fungus in it and will start and cause new infections next year. So that's why we got to get rid of all this, the tomatoes and the potatoes, and not leave any call piles, is typically what people, what you call it when you just put your pile of potatoes out back and leave them there to rot. Some of them may survive, and we don't want that to happen. There's no guarantee that we'll have late blight here next year, all right? But given the situation, I think we need to be prepared and expect it to be here and plan ahead. Just because it is just everywhere in the county, the likelihood that we could get some part of a plant or a potato survive the winter, that'll be a new source of inoculum next spring.
Bob, what about canning these now? Can you preserve these tomatoes if you cut away the damaged area? Can I still cold pack that or pressure, put that, preserve that for the winter?
The short answer to that is no. Okay. When we can, we want to have high quality, ripe, mature fruit. So these, we want to have them without blemishes, we want to have them without disease. These are not going to preserve well, so we need to discard them. If you can get them to ripen up without any diseases on them, then those will be okay to can. But otherwise, we're just going to have to dispose of them and probably go out and purchase tomatoes if we want to do some canning this year.
So a ripe plant, ripe tomato with a blister on is edible, and it's not harmful to eat. Just cut away the blister and don't can them, right? They're not.
Correct.
They're not hardy for.
That's
they're
right.
not good for canning.
No.
Right? And we need to discard the plant, but the disease will not overwinter. That's correct.
And that's correct. And we have very good fact sheets at the office on canning, and in those procedures, they explain, what fruit you need to have, the maturity and everything, in order to have success with canning.